The snow was falling again, soft and quiet over the walls of Winterfell. Lord Eddard Stark stood by the godswood, eyes closed, listening to the sound of the weirwood leaves rustling in the cold wind. He used to find peace here, among the old trees. But now, even the gods could not calm the fire inside him. It had been years since Lyanna died. Years since Rhaegar Targaryen stole her, shattered the realm, and left her to die in that lonely tower. Robert had won his rebellion. But Ned had never found peace. His sister was gone, her voice only a fading memory. And the one who started it all, the Dragon Prince, was dead. But his family lived, the dragons lived, and so did the lies. People called it a war for a crown, a rebellion for love. But it wasn't love. It was theft. It was death. Lyanna hadn't asked to be taken. She hadn't asked to die in childbirth alone. And now, as Ned looked across the snow-covered north, he knew one thing. It wasn't over. The Targaryen bloodline still breathed. Whispers had reached the north. Viserys and Daenerys, the last two children of the Mad King, had survived across the narrow sea, protected, growing. And the dragons. There were rumors, wild, impossible rumors, of fire awakening in the east. Some said a silver-haired girl had walked into flames and come out untouched. Ned didn't believe in myths. But he believed in blood. He believed in vengeance. He hadn't said a word to Robert. The king still drowned himself in wine and whores, talking of the glory days and cursing the Targaryen name, yet doing nothing. Robert had no real hunger left. But Ned, he had buried it deep for years, buried it with honor, with duty. Now it clawed at his chest like a wolf hungry for the kill. He made preparations in silence. Told Catelyn he was going to King's Landing, for politics, but that wasn't the truth. He would stop in the capital, yes, but his journey would not end there. He would sail to Essos, alone. Jon Snow had noticed the change in him. The boy had asked quietly if something was wrong. Ned had placed a hand on his shoulder, not trusting himself to speak. If Jon knew the truth, if he knew what Lyanna had really died for, he might not forgive Ned, but the truth was a burden for later. Now it was time for fire and blood. By the time he reached King's Landing, Littlefinger was waiting with his usual smug smile. Ned barely listened to his riddles. He only needed a ship and silence. The less the Crown knew of his journey, the better. Even Varys, with his spider web of whispers, must not hear of it. Ned wanted no war. Just justice. Quiet and final. He sailed from Blackwater Bay under the name Theon Flowers, a merchant looking for spices in Pentos. The crew didn't ask questions, not with the coin he paid. As the ship drifted toward the eastern waters, Ned stood at the edge, watching the sea foam crash below. The salt air stung his face. He had left everything behind, his wife, his children, his name. But this wasn't about honor anymore. This was for Lyanna. He reached Pentos under the cloak of night. Illyrio. Mopatis, the fat merchant prince, had grown powerful in recent years. Ned had heard his name whispered in the same breath as the Targaryen children. Gold bought silence, and Ned used plenty. He learned Daenerys had recently vanished into the Dothraki Sea with a Khalasar. And the most terrifying thing, she had walked into fire and come out with dragons, real dragons, living fire. Ned sat alone in his rented room that night, staring at a flickering candle. The world had changed. The Targaryens were no longer just scattered bloodlines and forgotten heirs. They were rising, and with dragons at their side, they would come for Westeros again. He clenched the hilt of his sword. Ice, he had called it. But this was no fight for steel alone. Dragons burned through armor and bones alike. Still, he would try. He would find Daenerys Stormborn. He would face the last of the dragons, and he would make sure Lyanna's death was not in vain. The desert sun was unlike anything Ned Stark had ever known. It was a burning thing, constant and cruel, nothing like the soft, whispering cold of the north. His skin, pale and untested by heat, reddened and cracked within days. The Dothraki Sea was not water. It was endless grass, gold and green, stretching forever. But the heat, the people, the chaos, it was nothing compared to what haunted his thoughts. He rode with traders now. Pentoshi, spicemen who feared the Dothraki but hungered for coin more. They carried silks, perfumes, and the illusion of bravery. Ned carried only silence and the sword strapped to his back. He didn't speak much. He listened, and the tales he heard chilled him far more than any northern winter ever had. She walked into her husband's funeral pyre, one trader said, voice hushed. Naked, with 3 dragon eggs at her feet. They said her skin would burn, melt like wax. But the next morning she stood unharmed. Dragons curled at her feet like babes. They say fire licks her but does not bite, another muttered. She is fire, she is storm, she is blood reborn. Ned said nothing. He kept his eyes on the horizon, his thoughts on Lyanna's scream, still echoing in his head after all these years. The Tower of Joy, the blood, the lies, Rhaegar's promise, whispered too late. And now his sister's ghost followed him across oceans. This girl, Daenerys, was her brother's child, a child of the dragon who took Lyanna. Ned had once spared a baby girl during Robert's rebellion, a child swaddled in bloodied sheets, hidden in a corner of the Red Keep. He had turned his back on Robert's command then. But this was different. Daenerys wasn't hiding. She was growing, gathering power, breathing fire, and dragons. Dragons did not grow quietly. They announced their return with smoke and screams. A rider approached their caravan one night. Dothraki, skin like copper, eyes like stone. He didn't speak, just observed. The traders went silent, one of them nervously offering a pouch of spice. The Dothraki sniffed, sneered, and spat into the sand. She is near, he said, voice rough, thick with accent. The mother of dragons watches. Then he rode off, dust in his wake. Ned tightened his grip on ice. The next day the caravan halted. Dothraki. Outriders circled them like wolves around prey, but they didn't strike. They waited, watched, and then parted. A single figure rode forward on a pale horse. She was younger than he expected, barely a woman. Silver gold hair down her back, violet eyes that gleamed like shattered moonlight. She didn't wear a crown, but she didn't need one. Daenerys Targaryen was royalty in every step, and at her side, dragons, not beasts of legend, not paintings. In old books, living fire, 3 of them, no bigger than dogs, but with wings that hissed when they opened, eyes sharp and glowing. One black as midnight, one green as forest moss, one cream-colored with golden horns. They slithered on her shoulders, wings flicking, nostrils steaming. Ned felt the old fear rising. Not of her, not of the beasts, of what they meant, of what they, or could do, of what she might become. You are far from home, northern man, Daenerys said, her voice calm but carrying steel underneath. Why? He didn't bow, he didn't kneel. I've come for justice, he said. She smiled faintly. Many men come seeking that. Most don't recognize it when they find it. You're Rhaegar's niece. She didn't answer right. Away. Her eyes searched his face. You knew him. I knew what he did, Ned said coldly. Daenerys' jaw tightened. He was my brother. He was the last dragon. He took my sister, Ned said, voice hard now. He stole her. Lied. About her. Left her to die in a tower alone, bleeding and afraid. He broke the realm. He started a war. I buried her with my own hands. The dragons hissed, sensing the tension. Daenerys stared at him for a long time. You are Eddard Stark. Yes. My brother loved your sister, she said quietly. Ned's eyes flared. Then love is a poison, because it killed her. Silence fell between them. Then, unexpectedly, Daenerys dismounted. The dragons stayed perched on her shoulders, clinging with sharp claws. She stepped closer, just a few feet away now. I was born in storm, she said. Raised in exile, hunted like an animal. I didn't start your war, Lord Stark, but I carry the ashes of those who did. Ned didn't blink. And what will you do with them? Burn the rest of us? Daenerys tilted her head. I don't seek revenge. I seek my birthright. And how many will die for that? She didn't answer. He looked at the dragons again. Beautiful, terrible creatures. Fire made flesh. I should kill you, Ned whispered. For her. For Lyanna. Then do it, Daenerys said softly. Strike me down, but ask yourself one thing first. Ned frowned. She pointed to the black dragon. Would she want that? He didn't answer. He couldn't, and deep in his chest a voice, not Daenerys's, whispered, Promise me, Ned. The wind changed that evening. It blew from the east, warm and dry, brushing through the endless grasslands like fingers through hair. Ned sat, alone beside the campfire, the Dothraki asleep around him. The sky stretched wide above, darker than the wolf's wood, deeper than the tunnels of Winterfell. He couldn't sleep. Across from him, the dragons slept, curled near their mother. Their little bodies radiated heat even in slumber, and when they breathed, tiny wisps of smoke danced from their nostrils. It was unnatural, and yet oddly peaceful. He hated that. Daenerys hadn't posted guards around him. No chains, no threats. After their confrontation, she had simply turned and walked away, leaving him to choose whether to leave or stay. He had stayed, and that troubled him more than anything else. What was he doing here? He had crossed oceans with vengeance in his heart. He had lied to his wife, abandoned his children, dishonored his duty, all for this. To hunt dragons, to stop the blood of Rhaegar from ever sitting on a throne again. But now, here he was, in a camp of barbarians, beside a woman who could command fire, and he hadn't raised his sword, he hadn't even tried. He still remembered the way she had looked at him, not with fear, not with hatred, with understanding, or perhaps something more dangerous, forgiveness. He didn't want her forgiveness, he didn't deserve it, and Lyanna, she couldn't ask for it. Do you dream of her? A voice said suddenly. He turned. Daenerys stood barefoot, wrapped in a thin cloth, hair flowing in the breeze. Her dragons stayed behind. She looked small in the firelight, but not fragile. No, never fragile, every night, Ned replied quietly. She sat beside him without waiting for permission. I dream of fire, she said. Always fire. Sometimes it consumes me. Other times I walk through it. But always it burns. Ned stared into the flames. You carry their blood. I do, she agreed. You could destroy kingdoms. I could. He turned to her now, voice harder. Will you? She didn't flinch. I will destroy those who try to chain me, or kill me, or make me small. I will not be like my brother. Viserys! He was obsessed with the past, with revenge, with pain. It killed him. Ned said nothing. Daenerys looked at him, eyes catching the firelight like amethyst. You came to kill me, I know that. You think your sister died because of my house. You believe your grief gives you the right to take my life. He clenched his jaw. Rhaegar started it all. She nodded slowly. Yes, but he's dead, and I'm not him. That truth hung in the air like smoke. Ned finally spoke. You weren't supposed to be like this, she raised an eyebrow. Like what? Reasonable. Daenerys smiled faintly. You expected a monster. I expected fire and blood. You may still get it, she said, her voice quiet. But not for you, not for your sister. He studied her. You could rule, couldn't you? I was born to, she said. But I've learned this. To rule is not to burn cities. It is to carry burdens heavier than thrones, to look into the eyes of those who hate you and not flinch. You understand that, don't you? Ned thought of Winterfell, of Robb growing into a man, of Sansa always watching, of Arya wild and untamed, of Catelyn's silence as he left. Yes, he understood burdens too well. He turned back to the fire. I should have hated you. Do you? She asked. He didn't answer. That night, as the stars drifted like snowflakes above the Dothraki camp, Ned Stark dreamed of a tower, the Tower of Joy again. But this time, the walls were burning. The sky outside was red, and the ground shook beneath him. Lyanna screamed inside the chamber as she always did. But when he pushed open the door, she wasn't alone. She cradled a baby in her arms, and beside her stood Rhaegar, his eyes full of fire, his hands raised not in threat, but in protection. You never listened, Rhaegar whispered. You never wanted the truth. And then he vanished in a blast of heat and shadow. Ned woke up with sweat on his brow. Something inside him was shifting, cracking. He couldn't hate Daenerys the way Robert did. He couldn't see her as just a name. She wasn't the Mad King. She wasn't Rhaegar. She wasn't even truly Westerosi. She was something new, something reborn, but that made her more dangerous, not less. He rose early the next morning, intending to leave. The vengeance had grown dull inside him, no longer a blade, but a burden. He couldn't stay here, couldn't get involved. He had to go home. But as he packed his things, a rider galloped into the camp, breathless, shouting in Valyrian. Daenerys appeared within moments. Her face turned pale as the message was translated. "A raven," she said, her voice hollow. "From Westeros, King Robert is dead." Ned felt the world stop. "How?" he asked. "Hunting accident. A boar." And then she looked at him, eyes burning with something new. "They'll come for you next, won't they? The Lannisters. If you return." He nodded slowly. "Yes." She stepped closer. "Then stay. Fight for something more than ghosts. Fight for the living." Ned Stark stood at the edge of a fire thousands of miles from home, hunted by memory, bound by duty, and faced with a choice: go home to certain war or stay with the last of the dragons. For the first time in many years, Ned Stark hesitated. He had never been a man of indecision. At war, in Winterfell, in Robert's court, his strength had always come from duty, from knowing what was right and doing it no matter the cost. But now, standing in the windswept plains of the Dothraki Sea, surrounded by strangers and the scent of foreign fire, he found himself caught between two storms, one born of the past and one breathing right in front of him. Daenerys said nothing more after telling him of Robert's death. She left him to think, as if she already knew what the silence would do to him. She was clever, too clever for her years, and that was dangerous, because clever rulers didn't die young. They endured. The next day, Ned received another message. This one not from ravens, but from whispered lips in the shadowy corners of Pentos. Joffrey Baratheon now sat the Iron Throne. Cersei ruled through him, and Lord Eddard Stark was a traitor, accused of plotting against the crown, hunted, branded disloyal by the Queen herself. He knew Robert's death hadn't been a hunting accident. He'd warned his old friend too many times about the Lannisters, but Robert was always deaf to the things that mattered. And now his silence had fed the lioness, and she had bitten. Ned had been exiled not by war, but by betrayal. He should have expected it. He should have prepared, but he had been too busy chasing ghosts. "You cannot return to Westeros," Daenerys said as they sat by a cliff overlooking a dried-up riverbed. The Dothraki had moved farther east, leaving her and a few blood riders behind. "Your name is poison in King's Landing." And yet, Ned replied, my blood is still in the north. My children are there. My people. They'll kill you before you reach the wall, she said bluntly. I'd rather die than run. Daenerys nodded, studying him. You are loyal, even when it hurts. It always hurts. She reached into her satchel and pulled something out. A ring of polished obsidian shaped like a wolf's head. It had once belonged to a smuggler from Lys, she said, who wore it as a good luck charm. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. You remind me of him, she said. He died trying to save someone else's child. Ned stared at the ring. Sometimes the old gods curse the selfless. No, Daenerys whispered. They make them into legends. He didn't wear the ring. He kept it in his pocket. Later that night, as a cold wind blew in from the coast, Ned found himself watching the dragons again. They had grown, not by much, but enough. Their scales glinted. In the moonlight, their eyes followed movement. They listened. The black one, Drogon she called it, was the wildest. It snapped at shadows, growled at birds, and even scorched a tent by mistake when startled. It reminded Ned of Arya, fearless, unpredictable, untamed. And that terrified him, because he knew where wild things went when the world feared them. They were hunted, or worse, they were crowned. He approached Daenerys once more the next morning, this time with intent in his step. I want to understand your purpose, he said. She looked up from her scrolls. You mean why I want the Iron Throne? No, he said. I understand that. I want to know if you deserve it. A long pause. Then she stood. Walk with me. They moved through the tall grass together, not speaking for a time. The world felt empty out here, like it belonged to something older than men and thrones. You know my family burned yours, Daenerys said finally. I know, he replied. Rickard, Brandon. Do you hate me for it? I try not to, he said. She turned to face him. The Mad King murdered your kin. Rhaegar took your sister. My brother sold my body for an army. Tell me, Lord Stark, what kind of blood runs through my veins? He didn't answer. Because he didn't know anymore, she continued. I've walked through fire, been whipped, hunted, poisoned, betrayed. I've seen good men die in my name. I've seen slavers beg for mercy. And through it all, I've learned one thing. What? Power means nothing without mercy, but mercy without power is death. She let the words hang between them. Then she added almost as an afterthought, if you still believe I'm my father's daughter, kill me now. Ned's hand moved slightly toward ice. His fingers grazed the leather sheath. But that was all. He let the sword rest. Do you know why I didn't kill you when I first saw you? He asked. Daenerys raised an eyebrow. Because when I looked at you, I saw Jon. She tilted her head. Who is Jon? He almost answered. The name rested on his tongue like snow on stone. But he stopped himself. Not yet. That truth was still a storm waiting to break. Instead, he turned away. I'm going north. I must return to my people. They'll kill you, she repeated. Then I'll die with my name intact. You'll die for nothing. He looked back at her, eyes colder now. Then let my death mean something to someone, Daenerys stepped forward. If you go north, you go alone. But if you stay, he held up a hand. Don't ask me to bend the knee. I won't, she said, but I will ask you to choose, not between me and them, but between yesterday and tomorrow. That night, Ned Stark stood at the edge of the sea again. In one direction, a ship waited to carry him back to Westeros. In the other, a dragon circled in the sky, wings stretched, casting a long shadow over the sand. And he knew the gods would not give him peace, not until he chose which fire to walk through. The ship never left the shore. It sat anchored, its sails folded, bobbing quietly in the gentle tide, while Ned Stark stood with one hand on the rope, staring out at the grey horizon. The captain waited for a signal, a word, a nod, something. It never came. Ned turned away from the sea, away from Westeros. He had made his decision, not out of loyalty, not even out of trust, but because the path of vengeance had brought him here, and vengeance had withered into something bitter and empty. The fire that had fueled him for years had cooled, and all that remained was duty. A new kind of duty. He returned to Daenerys's camp without a word. Her people looked at him with cautious eyes. To them, he was still a wolf among dragons, still an outsider, still a Stark. But the Khaleesi simply looked at him once, measured his face like a reader studies a map, and gave a small nod. She understood. And so the wolf stayed. Days turned to weeks. Ned became more than just a guest. He advised when asked, stayed silent when not. He trained with her blood riders, earning their reluctant respect. He taught some of her men the northern ways, discipline, formation, strategy. He watched the dragons grow larger, their scales harder, their fire stronger. He kept his distance from them, but they watched him, especially Drogon. That one always stared, quiet, thoughtful, dangerous, like it knew. And Daenerys, she changed too. She listened more, considered longer before speaking. Where once she spoke with fire, now she weighed her words like steel. She questioned her own followers, challenged her own beliefs. It wasn't Ned's presence alone that did it. She had that seed in her already, but he had watered it with hard truths. One night, she came to him with parchment and wine. "I'm building a council," she said, laying the parchment down. "Between them. If I ever sit the Iron Throne, it won't be as queen above all. It will be as queen with all." Ned looked down at the names. A few he knew, a few he didn't. "You want a realm built on choices," he said. She nodded. "And mistakes and mercy. I want the realm my brother promised, not the one he destroyed." There was a pause. Then she added, "I want you on that council." Ned almost laughed. "I'm no Lord of Essos. I'm a traitor to Westeros. My name means nothing anymore." "To me it does," she said quietly. "You were the only man who ever looked at me and didn't see a throne. You saw blood, consequences. You didn't worship or fear me. You questioned me. And that is what a queen needs." He looked at her, long and silent, and finally nodded. "I'll serve," he said, "but not forever." "Long enough," she replied. And so the wolf became something new, an old sword in a young queen's hand, not a knight, not a lord, but something rarer. A man who had seen too much and still chose to stand, but the past, as it often does, came chasing. It began with whispers. Lannister ships spotted in the narrow sea, gold cloaks marching in the streets of Braavos, ravens intercepted by the unsullied. Then the name whispered in shadowed taverns, Stannis. Robert's brother had declared himself king. He had burned gods, seized Dragonstone, and gathered forces beneath a red woman with eyes like fire. But worse than that, far worse, was the news that came next. Robb Stark had risen. Catelyn had marched to Riverrun. The North had crowned her son king in the North, and Winterfell had burned. Ned read the message with shaking hands. Bran and Rickon gone. The Boltons, traitors. The Greyjoys, raiders. The North, a battlefield. His family was drowning, and he was across the sea, teaching dragon children how to hold a spear. He packed that night, quietly. But Daenerys was waiting. "You can't leave now," she said. "I have to," he replied. "My people need me." She stepped in front of him. "If you go back now, you die. Cersei still has the throne. The North is broken. What can one man do?" "I'm not trying to win a war," he said. "I'm trying to bring my children home." She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she would command him to stay. She had that power now. She had armies, dragons, loyalty. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped closer and placed something in his hand. A dragon scale, black and smooth, For luck, she said. Ned looked down at it, then up at her. What happens if I fail? You won't, she said. He left at dawn. One man, one ship, one purpose. But this time he wasn't sailing toward revenge. He was sailing toward redemption. He would face the lion's den once more. Not as a hand of the king, not as a hunter, but as a father. And far behind him on the eastern wind, a dragon screamed into the sky, its call echoing across oceans, a warning to the realm that the age of fire was not over. It had only just begun. The seas were unkind on the return. Grey waves crashed against the hull like fists, as if the ocean itself was trying to pull Ned Stark back. Pull him away from Westeros, from the war-torn land of his blood, and bury him in the quiet that only death could promise. But he clung to the deck, soaked and unshaken. His fingers gripped the dragon scale Daenerys had given him, a shard of fire wrapped in silence. It rested in his pocket like a cold secret, and more than once he thought about tossing it into the sea. He didn't. He wasn't done yet. When he finally landed near White Harbor under a false name and a salt-stained cloak, the North was not the North he remembered. It had no chill in its wind, no loyalty in its bones. It was fractured, burning, betrayed. Rumors reached his ears like daggers in the dark. Winterfell's gone. The Boltons wear flayed banners now. Robb Stark's marching, but the South has teeth. The Lannisters want Ned Stark's head more than ever. And the Greyjoys, gods, they've taken the seas. He moved in silence, a ghost in his own land. He wore no sigil, carried no name, but wherever he went the small folk stared too long. His face was still carved into the realm's memory. Some spat in the dirt, some bowed in confusion, but most whispered, "Is it truly him? Is the wolf still alive?" He finally reached the Riverlands, under the shadow of night, hidden by friends of old oaths, men who had once fought beside him during Robert's rebellion, men who knew what a quiet word was worth. And there, in the burned halls of Riverrun, he found her, Catelyn. She looked older, thinner, her hair streaked with grey, her eyes sharp with grief. But when she saw him, truly saw him, she didn't run, she didn't strike. She didn't even speak, she just fell into him and broke. They cried like strangers, like people who had loved and lost, and lived past the day they were supposed to die. There were no accusations, no questions, just 1,000 unsaid things between them, folded into that one long moment. Then she told him what he feared most. Bran and Rickon were believed dead, burned by Theon Greyjoy, betrayed by a boy Ned had raised like a son. Robb had become a commander, a king, young, untested, and burning. With fury, Sansa was trapped in the lion's den, a pawn in a queen's game. Arya was missing, gone without trace, and Jon, sweet, silent Jon, was at the wall, blind to his name and legacy. "My family has shattered," Catelyn said, voice breaking, "and the pieces are being used as swords." Ned clenched his fists. Not for long. He rode north again, quietly. Not to fight, not to lead armies, to watch, to see. The Boltons had taken Winterfell. Their banners hung red and cruel, the sigil of a man without honor. Rose had become Warden of the North in name, but in soul he was nothing more than a butcher. Wrapped in silk, Ned stalked the shadows, slipping through towns and forests, leaving no name behind. The old gods watched him from the trees, and he watched the North suffer. He couldn't strike yet, not alone, but the fire was rising. From the east, word came. The Dragon Queen had crossed the narrow sea. Her ships were landing, the Dothraki rode. Through the Reach, the Unsullied marched for King's Landing, and the dragons flew. One night, under the icy stars, Ned lit a fire by the Godswood in a forgotten village. He stared into the flames, lost in thought. He did not hear the footsteps until it was too late. Steel pressed to his neck. He did not flinch. "I could slit your throat before you blink," said a voice. He knew it. He turned slowly. Arya. She looked like a shadow of herself, taller, harder, deadly in silence. Her eyes were colder than any Stark's had ever been. Not cruel, just forged, like Valyrian steel. He didn't speak. She didn't smile. Then she whispered, "I thought you were dead." "So did I," he replied. They sat by the fire, father and a daughter, reunited not by joy, but by shared survival. "I heard stories," she said. "You were in Essos, with her." He nodded. "Why?" "Because I hated her," he answered. "And then I didn't." Arya watched him. "Are you with her now?" "I'm with the living," he said. "Not the crown." She nodded slowly. "Good." They sat in silence, both understanding something deep without needing to say it. The realm was changing, the wheel was breaking, and soon the old names, old debts, and old truths would be spilled across the snow. That night a raven found them. It carried a black ribbon and a single line. "King's Landing has fallen. Daenerys had taken the capital with dragonfire, with blood, with the roar of thousands." And suddenly Ned Stark's silence turned into a storm inside him. Because now the wheel had turned full circle, and he knew what came next. The Dragon Queen would march north, to the land of ice, to the last great war, against the dead, against fate, against all. He turned to Arya, his voice firm. "Gather what Starks you, again. Find Jon. Prepare the north." She blinked. "And you?" Ned stood, ice strapped to his back. "I'm going to meet the fire I helped feed.